discuss Joe Biden, his son, or his family with the leader?
It doesn't matter what I discuss, but I will say this. Somebody ought to look into Joe Biden's statement.
But it does matter. And when you look at the law, well, it matters a lot. The Wall Street Journal reporting in a late Friday story that Donald Trump was pressing Ukraine to investigate his opponent, potential opponent, Joe Biden. The White House counsel is also involved, according to the Washington Post. Trump today dodging the questions about if it's related to getting dirt on Biden. All of this reviving questions about collusion. And, of course, the more legal term of art when you try to do something illegal, conspiracy. Donald Trump's own appointed inspector general calls this whistleblower complaint an urgent concern and differs with the intel chief who has been withholding it from Congress, a decision he came to, we've learned now, as this scandal has unfolded, with guidance from guess who? Bill Barr's Justice Department. In fact, there's a letter to the Intel Committee that says there's a respectful disagreement because the matter deals with DNI's most significant and important responsibilities, and that the acting intelligence chief has to withhold information, and that may just be about a, quote, gap in the law. Well, some legal experts say that the person in charge of the Intel committees here, the Intel agency, McGuire, is actually breaking the law by withholding this information. We turn now to develop all things legal on the story. John Flannery, who's worked with several congressional investigations. There may be one devoted to this. Good to have you on tonight, sir.
It's good to be here. This one's a chapter unto itself, historically, I think.
So when you get into this, what does it mean that they have blown through the legal deadlines? Does that in itself mean that the intel agencies here are in violation of the law, and what happens next?
Well, the director of national intelligence, so-called, he's the one who violated the law. There's basically 4 steps. 1, there's an urgent concern, the subject of a complaint. 2, the inspector general decides whether it's credible or not. 3, if it is, he passes it to the director, who shall distribute it to Congress. Shall. No discretion, no ability to do anything except to perhaps add notes. 4, Congress gets it and acts upon it. So, yes, he is absolutely had no discretion, that is the director, had no discretion to withhold this information from the House or the Senate. In fact, is directed to send it to both, and he didn't do so. And apparently he gave a heads up to the White House and a heads up to the Justice Department to find a way to not disclose that the President of the United States was cutting a deal with a foreign nation state who happens to have a comic as a leader, so that he would, for money, create a situation investigating the president's primary opponent, who is favorable now, so he might not have him in a general election.
Now, if any federal official in the United States pursued this plot on their own,
yes,
would they be potentially violating the law?
No. And I'll tell you why. Number one, we have to lose this notion that the Office of Legal Counsel and Justice has to protect the president, saying no sitting president can be indicted. I can't think of a better case to argue against the notion that a president shouldn't be disturbed because he may not do as well in office. This guy is the poster child for the worst president in American history. So that rationale makes no sense. But Article 2 of the Constitution says there are 2 ways to deal with a president. One is removal, and the others by indictment, and they're separate, and they don't have anything to do with each other, and so he could be indicted. And so could Rudy Giuliani.
What if just the Defense Department decided randomly they wanted to do this? Is there anything illegal about, as one of the newspaper accounts put it, trying to extort a foreign leader to help win a domestic campaign?
Well, if I offer you money, saying if I give you whatever millions of dollars, and you start an investigation on the guy who's a target in my election, first of all, the investigation is not reliable. You're doing it for the monies. And we have all sorts of anti-bribery statutes for passing money overseas. And I don't know where he's getting the money, but I suppose it's the same way he gets money for his wall, which is illegal. So I think those are the kinds of problems.
Yeah.
This guy there's more complexity to his crimes by his impulse, by the fact that nobody does anything to stop him at any time by any kind of coercion that can be found in the Constitution or found in the laws.
Right, and you have a situation where obviously people around him are trying to protect him, and they say, this looks bad, so we're not going to fork this over. It's not as if Donald Trump is an expert on the Inspector General federal requirements. So other people say, this looks bad, and then they deal with it, then he learns more about it. Maybe he learns about it as it's spilled out into the press. Right. Something else that's spilled out that I want to get you on, and this is so new, I doubt viewers have heard about it yet, and this goes to the heart of the beginning of the Mueller probe. The New York Times now has a document that is the original memo. It was written by the person who took over from James Comey running the FBI, a man who's been in the news for several reasons, Andrew McCabe, and he details what was a secret, high-stakes conversation with the person who was then in charge of the Russia probe, Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. This is all about how the Mueller probe began. And according to this material, Rosenstein basically told McCabe that he had a full plan in place for both appointing Mueller and what to do if Trump fired him for doing it. Writing, quote, he anticipated he may be terminated in light of Trump's anger with Attorney General Sessions over his own recusal. And he said that he heard people say that Trump said to Sessions, quote, you were supposed to protect me. This is very hot stuff. It's a testament to the way our government works, even amidst crisis, that this stuff was documented at the time. It didn't leak during the probe when Mueller was doing his thing, and it is now out with some required redactions, but I would note they're pretty minimal. What do you take from this new reporting, a new memo?
Well, I have a prejudice about Rosenstein because he seems to have an identity crisis throughout this investigation, particularly at the end of it. And on its face, it sounds like he's warning him you could be fired. And is that to chill his prosecution, or was that a precedential memo that led to him closing down the investigation by my idea early at the water's edge of prosecuting Trump or his family or his finances?
Well, let me build on your premise and ask you the final question.
Okay.
We know there were at least 3 Rod Rosensteins. There was the first Rod Rosenstein who helped Trump fire Comey. There was the second Rod Rosenstein who said, firing Comey was so bad, we need Bob Mueller to come in and handle an independent investigation, which was a thing that Rod was involved in. And then there was at least a third Rod Rosenstein who, according to credible reports, assured Trump, I can land the plane without you getting hurt too much. So at least 3. What are we all to take from it at the end of the day? Well, I ask you, our bow-tied expert.
My most charitable interpretation is he's a very malleable fellow.
Is that why he stayed in office for as long as he did?
Well, you know, people show a chameleon-like aspect if they live very long in public office. And the Justice Department creates chameleons all the time to do all sorts of things, good and bad and terrible and honest and unfair. And it's always been a viper's nest, as far as I could say. I was so grateful I was in the Southern District of New York, not in Main Justice. Rudy Giuliani went down there as a Bobby Kennedy Democrat. He came back as a Cro-Magnon man. I mean,
our viewers have by now, everyone's learned the differences and they know how independent New York rolls. So you do act more like a Southern District New Yorker than some other places. I'll tell you what I think. I think the House Judiciary Committee has got to bring Rod and these other folks in for public testimony, because we're back into the heart of what really went down. And Donald Trump clearly thinks he won. He can get away with it. He bullied Mr. Rosenstein at times, clearly in public. We've got to learn the full rest of the story.
I have a few seconds. If they invite the Inspector General to arrange to have the source come talk to them, it would seem to me it would be a remedy for violating the statute, because the statute says if for any reason the complaint does not, the complainant may arrange through the Inspector General an appearance.
That's a great
That
point.
might be the most efficient legal way that you could navigate this statute buried in 50 USC down in the guts somewhere.
That is a great point you make about the details of the statute that could remedy what is a Trumpian attack on its clear requirements. John, I love learning from you. Thanks for being here.
I like being here. Thank you.
Amen. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.